A birth is defined as traumatic if the woman was or believed she or her baby was in danger of injury or death, and she felt helpless, out of control, or alone, and can occur at any point in labour and birth. It's important to recognise that it is the woman's perception that determines the diagnosis, whether or not clinical staff or caregivers agree. Hello there, welcome back to The Bleeding Truth. My name is Sally McNally, I'm the Irish midwife.
And I'm Bridget, Sally's daughter.
Today we want to talk about traumatic birth. And in just a little while, we're going to interview and chat with the lady, one of my own patients who had a traumatic birth. And she'd like to share her story with you all. So there may be some parts of this conversation that make some of you a little nervous, especially if you're still pregnant and especially if it's your first baby.
So maybe don't listen to it if that's your case.
Right, exactly. Maybe don't keep it for later.
Listener discretion is advised. Some of the topics we talk about are a little bit more serious or heavy, and we're in a good mood or most of the time when we're talking about it, but it doesn't take away from the seriousness of some of the topics as well.
Thanks, Bridget. That's so true. But when we think about a traumatic birth, I really like that definition of it because it's the woman's perception. And I've been in the labour room for many, many years, and I have witnessed many, many traumatic births. We think that about 45% of women might have a view of their birth as traumatic in some form.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really high. Yeah.
And about 5 to 6% of women will actually suffer from PTSD, post-traumatic stress, just as though she'd been to a war or had witnessed a horrible, violent event. She may experience post-traumatic stress symptoms. So it can range, like a traumatic birth can range from mild to severe. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's the woman's perception, right?
Right.
For me, when I think back on the patients that I've witnessed that might have had a traumatic experience, of course, the obstetrical emergencies, the 1% of patients who have like a severe obstetrical emergency that's life-threatening, of course, that is a traumatic birth experience. Mm-hmm. And I would imagine that most of those patients would suffer some form of PTSD.
Yeah. I mean, I can imagine if you're in a situation where there has to be some sort of like emergency C-section or something. Right. Yes. There's like a huge loss of control or fear of, the outcome where just that uncertainty can cause a lot of distress for anybody. Right. And even if, there's no negligence at all on the side of the doctors and nurses and stuff, it could still be terrifying.
Yes. So, and this traumatic experience, it can affect the baby, it can affect the partner, and honestly, a traumatic birth is one of those really bad 1%, and sometimes with the ones that have the really bad outcomes, that can traumatize the whole staff.
Of course.
Yeah. The midwife, the doctor, the nurses, even the secretaries and the scrubs, everybody gets the effect, because where we work, it's about joy, bringing babies into the world. Everyone thinks, wow, that must be so much fun. And for the most part, it is so great. And most of your babies, girls, most of your babies are going to come out just fine. But we do have situations that are traumatic and we have to talk about them.
Right.
And we're going to talk about them today.
Right. So when it comes to, different areas of like what could be considered a traumatic birth, what are probably the most typical lead ups to what would be considered more of a traumatic birth?
Well, a very traumatic one. It might be something like the emergency C-section that you mentioned.
Right.
She's having a lovely labor. Everything seems to be going well, but then all of a sudden the baby isn't well, or she isn't well, or she's bleeding. Something happens that now we need to go to the operating room and do an emergency C-section. And then, of course, that's so different to what her vision of birth
plan
was.
Yeah.
That's why childbirth classes are so helpful, because in childbirth classes that's discussed, and if that does happen, you have an idea of what to expect and what to do, that you can still do your breathing and deep relaxation, and that hopefully your partner can still be with you.
Right. Just to have like some mental preparation, like if this goes wrong or if anything goes wrong, I'll think about this situation to make myself calm down or something.
Right. To have like even a little idea, like a little trick to pull out of your bag of tricks.
We were supposed to do that, visualization wise, even when I was like an athlete for swimming.
Yes.
Of course you're going into a race with a race plan in mind of, you're going to do well at this, yard mark, and you're going to pick it up here. But of course, I mean, this is a minor situation, but it's like, things could go wrong. Maybe your cap falls off, or, maybe, your finger gets stuck in the lane line. And when those things happen, do you get thrown off totally and just completely fall apart in the race? Or do you
fix the problem,
collect yourself, work with what you've still got, and like keep going? I mean, obviously that's very different to a birth situation, but just having like the ability to adapt can really help in any stressful situation.
That's such a good way of looking at it.
I just thought of that, as we were talking about it.
Yeah. So sometimes I say, how do you make God laugh? Show him your birth plan. Because like there might be one or two little things in there that don't happen. And honestly, I have met a few ladies who are traumatized because they were so sure if they'd gone through this process of making a birth plan and that this is the way it was going to happen. And then something didn't happen, and that's all they can then focus on. And it's a constant annoyance and almost like a traumatic effect on them. Like I've known a few ladies who really wanted a natural birth and went through my natural childbirth class years ago, and then they didn't end up having a natural childbirth. For some reason, they changed their mind and they had an epidural, or even ended up having a C-section. But then they were like traumatized. All their friends in the park and all their group, they all had natural births, and why couldn't I? And they feel like a failure. And that's really sad, isn't it? But most of the traumatic births or the perception of trauma in their birth, it could be something like having a laceration, a tear that needed to be stitched, or a vacuum extraction where the baby needed to be delivered quickly with a little vacuum. Or it could be something as simple as the way somebody spoke to her, like spoke down to her, or made her feel judged, or made her feel stupid because she didn't know something. And then she felt, uneducated, or that she felt like she wasn't doing the best for her baby.
Or maybe not feel like, just if you feel like you're not being heard or something like that, when you're in pain and stressed, that can definitely.
Yeah. One would hope that the more we talk about this, that the more it'll fall into the right ears. Now, of course, we want it to fall into the ears of the women who are going to deliver the babies, but we want this information to fall into the ears of the midwives and doctors that are delivering babies right now. I believe that the training in, the hospitals is so much better. There's when I watch the new doctors recently doing deliveries and stuff, they seem to have a better way of talking to the patient. There's more of an even person to person rather than I'm the doctor up here and you're the patient way down here. That's something.
Not like a power imbalance.
Right.
That's kind of,
yeah.
I can see that.
Yeah. We have to realize that we're doing a job and the patient is our job. You know, they're delivering.
They're the boss.
They're the boss. Yeah.
Well, that's how I feel like, I mean, obviously not in every case, you know, they can't make all the medical decisions, but yeah, they should be respected. Right. For sure. Yeah.
I remember every word that was spoken to me during my birth and delivery.
Right. And if you're remembering the words that you've seen the doctors say to other patients or, you know, whatever case, and it sticks in your mind, imagine how much it probably sticks in their mind.
Yeah.
You know, for their birth. Yeah.
But even though I perceived my birth as beautiful experience in my life, I remember in the weeks after it, every now and then I'd get kind of like a little tremor of like, oh, there it is, that feeling of the ring of fire and it's about to happen. And there's that it's like pretty wild experience feeling. Having a baby. Wow. Bridget, it's wonderful. But yeah, there was like a little kind of like a tremoring kind of feeling inside me. I remember that. And I often thought, wow, is that traumatic experience? No, it couldn't be because I loved my birth. But what if a woman has like pretty much normal birth, normal physiological birth, but something like the way somebody looks at her or talks to her, or maybe her partner not being able to be there due to COVID or something like that. All of that can lead to the perception of a traumatic birth, and she may never get over it. But then there's a lot of other things that can cause a traumatic birth, like the baby not being well and going to NICU. The baby being stillborn, very traumatic, of course.
Of course, yeah.
We hope to have a lady talking to us about that subject at a later date. And sometimes, too, if a person hasn't, you know, educated themselves about what is birth, then they can be terrified of what's happening inside their body, and their own mind can be where the trauma is coming from. That you feel the contraction coming, but your mind might say, you're going to die. This is not right. This can't be right, you know.
And yeah, not to draw it away from the birth part, but that's also like in a lot of cases of, you know, mental health.
Yeah.
You know, it's how you perceive the situations around you and or how you allow yourself to think about it at a later date and just rumination and stuff.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but it makes complete sense that it would be the same for this type of PTSD too.
Right. But then when we go back to, you know, the severe PTSD symptoms, can you imagine a young mom? There she is, she's trying to learn how to breastfeed and look after a new baby, and she's going through, you know, these types of signs, intrusive memories, where all of a sudden the traumatic experience is right there, just like a soldier coming back from a war. Avoidance of talking about it or thinking about it, or being around other women because all the other women are gushing and happy, and negative thinking, and even her mood could be negative. And of course, when you have a traumatic birth, you're way more likely to have postpartum stress and anxiety, or a perinatal mood disorder of some sort. And then changes in her physical or emotional reactions, you know, like being irritable and guilty all the time, and startle reflexes is heightened. She's on guard all the time. Sometimes she can even be self-destructive, like eating too much or not eating enough, or using something like drugs or alcohol to soothe the way she's feeling.
Right.
So it's really important, you know, that we're on the lookout for it. What I love to do is go to a woman the day after she's delivered. She's had a little time to process, and then to say to her, well, what do you remember? Tell me your birth story. Even if I've been the midwife that delivered her, and I know what my perception of her birth was, but I know that it's not my perception whether it was traumatic or not. It's her perception.
Right.
And maybe the baby had to go to the warmer to be looked at by the NICU staff for some tiny little reason for a few minutes. That could have been huge in her mind,
Yeah.
Or she might just like to tell me that it wasn't traumatic, that it was beautiful. But as I'm listening to the story, I might be able to pull out little parts that sound like, that might get stuck in her mind later. We don't always have time to dig into the birth stories, but I always encourage women, tell your birth story. It's really important to tell all the little details, and also the partner to tell all the little details, to hear yourself telling that story, because it's a huge,
helps to process
huge milestone in your life.
Yeah. And then, if you've come across some women when you're talking to them like that and you realize it was a very traumatic birth for them, like, what do you do then?
Right. Well, of course, we have to get them help. We have to find, we do the mental health screening on everyone. But if we suspect that, she's having a harder time earlier in her postpartum period, we're going to start doing those mental health screens earlier in the office and see her more often in the office, and then see if she needs a therapist. If she doesn't already have one, we'll give her mental health resources. If she needs medication, we're going to give her antidepressants or anti-anxiety medication. And we're going to, refer her to places like the Postpartum Support International. Big fan. Postpartum Support International. They have a lot of resources. They have a 1-800 number that, you can call day or night. There's always a therapist there.
We'll link that one as well.
That's the best one. I love that one. And there's other ones too. There's one called Patch, PATTCH.
Right.
We'll link that one too.
That one's prevention and treatment of traumatic childbirth.
Yeah. So to lead up to the prevention, what can you do to prevent it? Educate yourself. Go to your prenatal classes. Talk to your providers. And so our job is to protect you and get you around those big boulders in that part of your life if they show up. Your job is to, not expect a big boulder, but to know that if it does show up, how do you gravitate yourself around it with our guidance and help?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Because sorry, I am very passionate about this subject, but
good.
Like I have had women who've had what I would think of as, oh my gosh, such a traumatic birth. And I go to them the next day to see how they're feeling, like after a postpartum hemorrhage or emergency C-section. And they'll say, I'm so happy, look at my baby. And their whole focus seems to be on the joy now they have their baby, because they knew that if these things happened, that they were going to be okay, they were going to get through it. And
definitely
so some people have
a lot on
stronger
preparation.
Resilience.
And just personality. I mean, like some people tend to look as if the glass is half full or versus half empty, and that could change just like the simple things of how you interpret an experience.
I always like that, is the glass half empty or is it half full? What we all forget about is that it's refillable, right? That you can.
But if you guys are, with us so far, please make sure to like and subscribe, and we're going to transfer over to that conversation with Charidie and hear her story.
Thank you. I appreciate being here. Thank you for the invite.
So Charidie, you were very well prepared. You educated yourself. Tell us about what you thought your birth was going to be like to start. What was...
That's a great question. So I should say that that my age actually played a lot into some of the decisions that we made. My husband and I are both 38, 37 at the time that we conceived. We had gotten pregnant very easily, thankfully, which was such a blessing. And when I saw my first pregnancy test, I knew instantly that I was going to miscarry, unfortunately. And I did 2 weeks later. I was prepared for it mentally. I didn't feel like a sense of loss. What I was not prepared for was how quickly we got pregnant again. I actually had a cyst on my right ovary. And so I went in to see Sally. We confirmed that it was a miscarriage, unfortunately. And we discovered through an ultrasound that there was a cyst on my right ovary. We were going to keep an eye on that. But it was good news because it meant things were working. So fast forward, I go back as a follow-up appointment, and I think it was about 30 days later, I was pregnant again.
Wow.
And so that was a little bit surprising because of how easily it happened both times. Prior to that, I didn't even know if I could conceive. And I had been on birth control for so long. So we had decided to wait a little bit later in life for several reasons. We wanted to travel and make sure that we were prepared mentally, emotionally, financially, as much as you can be. I don't think you can ever be fully prepared. But we had also recently had made a big move up to a very small town in Central California. We're actually in Ojai. And we just decided that this was the time to start a family. So in thinking about my birth plan, I wanted to first see what I could do as a woman. And I wanted to go into it as holistically and as naturally as possible. And we were very lucky because we were introduced to Sally kind of by way of friends. Sally had helped assist with several of our friends' babies, and they had beautiful, healthy, easy deliveries. They talked about her skills as far as just making sure that they felt so comfortable. All of them were very proud to report that there was no tearing. And we immediately knew this is the direction that we wanted to go. And so we decided to, like I said, just really research everything. We tried to make sure that we were very prepared. And our first step was signing up for a hypnobirthing class. And so I did a lot of visualization. I talked to a lot of people. And I thought at the time that if you write a well-crafted plan, everything will go according to that plan. I've since learned that's not the case.
Right.
So, yeah.
How do you make God laugh? Show him your birth plan.
That's what I've heard. I've since learned that. Well, and I remember seeing, the sweetest smiles on some of the nursing staff faces when I hand them this long list, and they smiled. And I can say, and I know that this is not often the experience for others, but the one thing I can say with my whole medical team is that every single person that I came into contact with during my delivery tried to honor me in that plan. Which, I think we'll talk about, here in just a little bit on how that came into fruition, because they really did everything they could to honor me in that plan, which was so great.
Great.
And I was so thankful for.
Yeah,
that's really great to hear that. I love that. That's great.
Yeah. So at what point, during your, actual birth, did it kind of go sideways? Was everything like going well at first and then just something went wrong? Or I haven't heard. Sally didn't tell me the story yet. So
So I should kind of rewind a little bit, and hopefully I'm not giving too long of answers, but
no worries.
I had a really great pregnancy. I was also a little bit concerned. Again, I know that age shouldn't make that much of a difference, but
right.
I thought that it would have some bigger effects. And so one of the things that I didn't mention previously was that we did, kind of with some encouragement based on kind of some of the viewpoints in the town that we live in, was talking about doing a home birth. And there was a lot of encouragement for people that we're close to explore that. And we did. We thought about the idea. And I think that's definitely a decision that everyone has to make for themselves. I thought, because I had such a beautiful pregnancy, my first trimester was a little rough as it is, but the rest of my pregnancy was fantastic. I ended up going a little bit over my due date. I needed to be induced at 41 weeks and 5 days, which I didn't see that happening, but I also was very comfortable up until the last minute of my pregnancy. I would have gone 2 more months if it would have been safe. I was really loving it. And So I ended up getting induced. There was a little bit of a waiting list. I had some family in town, and they had come out for 10 days and got here. My due date was May 12th. They got here May 10th, thinking that they were actually going to miss the delivery. And then being late, they had only planned to stay for 2 weeks. So I had my aunt in the delivery room with me and Mark. And so we go in and we started with some Cervidil. I was able to kind of progress. My intention was to, and through the hypnobirthing process, I had visualized doing a natural birth. That was very much my plan. And after several hours of one solid contraction, I decided to tap out a little bit. The one promise I had made to myself, and this goes back to the wonderful nurses in my room and honoring my birth plan, is that, at no point was anything ever pushed towards me or heavily encouraged. They let me kind of really drive, which was great. And the promise I made to myself was that I would try every single thing at least once before I decided to do an epidural. So I got the tub, I bounced on the ball. We did, Sally, remind me of the name with the scarf.
The rebozo.
We tried some of that, tried all the things, and I ended up only being dilated to a 4 at that time. And I thought, oh, I've gone this long and I'm only at a 4. I'm going to be here for days. And so decided to do an epidural. After that, I was able to really kind of relax. I'd given myself permission to forgive myself if I made that decision, because I was so set. And when I had visualized my pregnancy, the thought of a C-section never even came into my mind. It really didn't. I really had visualized my birth so much that I knew that I was going to push. And within, the first 30 minutes, likely I was going to be holding my daughter. Aww. And so it was, this is a long answer, and let me get to your question. It was about a little over 3 hours in when suddenly things took a turn and things changed a little bit.
Gotcha. Yeah. And that was just like the realization of this isn't going to happen the way I had planned, pretty much. Or
I give it an analogy when in talking with friends. The thing that I can say, I had when it came time to push, I felt emotionally, mentally, and even physically, I felt fantastic. It felt like such a beautiful experience, and my heart was so full, and I would not have changed a thing. And, when we were, I'll let Sally go into a little bit more detail, but my daughter was very low in the birth canal. Sally is like, I'm touching her hair. I can feel her. We're so close. And I felt how low she was. And I'm pushing and pushing. And the women in my family tend to deliver very fast. And so when the first hour rolled by, I was kind of like, come on, I'm tougher than this. What is happening? And so I'm pushing some more, and, I'm kind of getting in touch with my inner lioness, and I'm like bearing down.
I was just thinking of a lioness. You were so strong, and your energy was perfect. Your effort at pushing was perfect. And you were trying all different positions and all different types of breathing. You were fabulous. It was perfect. But the baby wasn't coming out the way we would expect.
Is there a reason, or what causes that to happen? Not fully dilating, or
for most babies, it's the position that they take. And I think that was your case, Charidie, the baby's position. The baby presented with the widest part of their head instead of tucking their head down to present with the narrowest part.
Bridget, there was something really interesting that happened. This is a funny story, and this will cause different people to have different maybe reactions based on their beliefs. But when I was 21 years old, I was at a large county fair in Wyoming, where I'm originally from. And there was a lady, I'm standing in a crowd of people, probably 5,000 people. There was a lady who I seen kind of weaving through the crowd, and she was making a beeline towards me. And she came up to me and she said, "Excuse me, we've never met before. You don't know me. But I need to tell you something. It's so important I tell you this." And I said, "Okay." And she said, "You have a tilt to your uterus, and it's going to cause you a problem one day." And I thought, oh, thank you.
Oh, wow.
And, it was so odd. I thanked her, and I stored that away, and I ended up mentioning it to Sally. And it's very common. Sally, it is pretty common for that to happen, correct?
Oh, to have a tilted uterus?
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes they tilt forward, anteverted. Sometimes they tilt back, retroverted. Sometimes they stand straight up.
Yeah.
But yeah, it can be, common to lean one way or the other. Yeah.
So somehow,
and that causes like difficulties, I guess.
Well, not
Or-
usually, but maybe if it went left or right, that perhaps that could. And if you had a big
Interesting.
ovarian cyst, that can push it over into one
Wow.
direction or another too. Yeah.
That's wild.
But this lady could see through you. She could.
She knew somehow, and I never looked at it as that was like, I didn't, when I was doing my visualization, I didn't go into it thinking, oh, this, I'm going to have a problem because this lady told me this. It was simply like,
Right.
hey, I have this bit of information so we can avoid a problem.
Yeah.
And I did not think it was going to have an issue. And so it was a little after 3 hours of pushing. The only way I can describe it was throughout my whole birthing experience, and while I was pushing, I was in the car by myself in the driver's seat. It was a very internal experience. And suddenly something shifted, and it was like somebody else had gotten in the car with me, and I was in the back seat so I could see and hear what was going on, but I was no longer in control of what was happening with my body. And I just remember my family has kind of laughed about it now, that my aunt said I went from calm to crazy in about 15 seconds. I mean, it was.
No.
And Sally, I'd love to hear your perspective on this, because all of a sudden I just
it
said,
was
stop.
like you had. It was like an epiphany in you, that you had this inspiration that you knew, and none of us could talk you back into pushing and let's keep going. There was. No, you knew you had to go and have a C-section.
Wow.
You knew. It was that maternal instinct. It was like, I need to protect my baby. I'm going to have to tell you guys, no, we have to do this. And it was really, really amazing, really strong, and very direct. And we all knew that was it. We had to go and do a C-section. We're so happy.
It was challenging because she was so low. We wanted to avoid that surgery, and we wanted to do everything. And I just, all of a sudden, one of the things we didn't mention is that as I was pushing, each time I would push, the baby's numbers would kind of decelerate. And then when I would stop pushing, they would recover, which is, again, I think is fairly common.
It's fairly common, but it was getting worse and deeper. Yeah.
And I didn't see that. But Sally and our wonderful nurse said, that they mentioned that Nikki was going to be on standby. And I think that's all of a sudden when I realized this is very interesting. The other thing that happened as well is that we decided kind of midway pushing that we thought maybe the epidural was going to be kind of interfering, just because you don't have as much feeling.
Yes, we turned it off. Yes.
So we decided to turn it off. And right before right before I got in the back seat, all of a sudden, from my eyebrow down to the tip of my toe on the left side, felt like somebody had broken every bone in my body and lit it on fire. My right half felt fine. I didn't have 1 ounce of pain. It was just, I think that, my belief system was that was God's way of saying, you have to listen to me and you have to trust yourself. And it was just like all of a sudden my intuition took over, and my traditional voice was very much pushed to the back, and then it got a little crazy from there.
Yeah.
Wow. So wait, so you had like a total split where, half your body was just in pain.
Yes. And it was a pain that, I've never done this before, and of course haven't since, but it was a pain that I wouldn't associate with labor. It wasn't like what I would assume was a traditional
Doesn't sound
labor.
like,
because even my face felt like it was on fire, and I was having pain in a shoulder blade and weird things where it was just like, there was no way to ignore it. And all of a sudden it was, all of a sudden I said, stop, we have to stop.
And your face even was like, something's wrong. We have to change it. Something's wrong. And it was like, it was startling, really. But, so we all kind of like, where you gotta go, we gotta do this. And we got Dr. Diesfeld, and we all like went in pretty quickly too, to do a
very quickly. Yeah, it was. I do remember saying something, and And I was so surprised because, again, I'm hearing the words that are coming out of my mouth, but I don't know where they're originating from. And I just remember saying, if we don't get in the OR, I'm going to die. I'm going to die. And my nurse and Sally said, you can't die during a contraction. And I'm like, no, if we don't get in there, I'm going to. And then since having conversations with Sally and Dr. Diesfeld, I don't want to jump to, I don't want to ruin the surprise ending, but I did end up having a postpartum hemorrhage. And Dr. Diesfeld has since told me that likely, if by some miracle I was able to push her out, that there's a high likelihood that would have happened anyway. And it would have been more challenging to find the bleeding to get stopped. But I thankfully ended up having a transfusion. And what's interesting is that, Sally is very meticulous, as you know, and I mean, we crossed every T and dotted every I, and she actually sent me to do a huge hematology workup prior to giving birth, and everything came back great. So we didn't, we thought we had done everything, that there was and
so Charidie, may I add this little bit to your story that you did have a little extra bleeding after having your tonsils removed. Was that?
Yes, my tonsils and my appendix. Yes.
Yeah.
I've had that.
Yes.
I had a very scary experience with tonsils.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, twice I had to go back into the ER for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go under and get the recauterized. That sucks.
Right. And how old were you? Can I ask how old
that was right before college, so I was like 18. Yeah. How old were you?
You knew that that it was something that you knew enough to be afraid of it. It's not like when you're a child and you don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard also, like, if you get that surgery done when you're a little kid, that it's not as bad, but as you get older, it's a lot tougher to heal. And it's just hard when you can't hydrate as easily because it hurts to swallow. And then what happened was, in the middle of the night, it would, like, the scab would break open, and then I was like, blood everywhere. It's like a movie scene.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're here. That you made it through.
Yeah, of course. Like, I mean, I think it was good because Sally helped me with, like, an IV and stuff. So after a while, I was all right. But like, does that make that something like a scare for, later in pregnancy?
Yeah. So, I wasn't nervous going into my pregnancy. I thought the biggest challenge that I was going to have to overcome was getting pregnant, and that, like I said, happened so seamlessly. And then we have had a lot of talks, and Sally can share her thoughts on this too, but we've had a lot of conversation on if we ever wanted to do this again. And our original plan was always to be one and done. And when I visualized our family, I only saw a daughter. And so I think that, because of that, I do still currently sitting here right now today, do have a pretty intense fear of getting pregnant.
And that's perhaps part of your traumatic, post-traumatic stress, too. Yeah. Yeah, and that's very understandable.
Yeah, and that was actually one of my questions. I was going to ask, if you have even considered, going through that again. Yeah. But that makes sense.
But let's hear the story from when you went into the OR. What happened then? Because sometimes the cesarean it's a little traumatic, but not very traumatic, right? Sometimes it can baby comes out and everyone's happy, it's all over. But not in Charidie's case.
Unfortunately, yeah.
So I should mention that Mark, my husband, is a former Navy SEAL and is a combat veteran. And so he is very good under pressure and stress. And I remember kind of mumbling, can Mark stay in the operating room? And they said, yes, as long as you stay awake. Yeah. And so I'm like, okay. But at this time, I mean, she's so low on the birth canal. I'm at the stage, and I don't know what the terminology is, but where I can't even stop pushing, even if I wanted to. Yeah. So we get in there. I decided that I knew that there was going to be some trauma that I was absorbing. So I decided just to seal my eyes shut because I was going to have the auditory and the physical trauma. I didn't want the visual trauma as well. So,
oh, wow. That's smart.
Yeah.
Just sealed my eyes shut, and we got in. And
very wise woman.
Yeah.
Thank you. We get into the OR. At this point, I'm begging the anesthesiologist, please do something, please. And he said, I'm going to get you all set up. And he starts giving me something, and I feel like I'm going to vomit. So I'm on my back. Things are furiously happening below the curtain. I don't know what's happening, but they are prepping quickly. I'm still pushing. I pushed in the delivery room, or the OR, I'm sorry, for about 10 minutes because we thought we could still get her out. She was right there.
Right.
So I start feeling like I'm going to vomit. And so I'm dry heaving on my back. Mark is holding, my anesthesiologist is on my right shoulder. Mark is on my left shoulder. They start prepping me for surgery. They decide it's time for go time. And I believe it was an ice cube. The anesthesiologist says, can you feel this? And I could feel it on my head. Can you feel it on your chest? Yes. Can you feel it on your C-section stomach area? No. My lower abdomen? No. But I did feel, because of the anesthesia, I felt like I was having a difficult time breathing. And I've always heard if you're talking, you're breathing. And so I said, why does it feel like I'm choking? And he says, that's part of it, but you're talking. I'm watching your numbers. That helps relax me. He said, you have plenty of oxygen. I said, okay. I did not feel the first incision at all, but somehow I felt quite a bit after that. I could feel, I think it was at least 6 hands on different parts. I remember one being kind of like on my hip, and I kept saying, why do I feel this? Why do I feel this? And again, that shoulder blade pain.
Wow.
I was like, why is my shoulder feeling it? I mean, it felt like someone was just like stabbing me in my shoulder. And so I just hear him say, we're going to have to put her under. And, things are still, everyone by this time is working so fast. And what Mark will say is that it was like a symphony. He said that the way and I'm going to let Sally speak to this, but I guess there were some extra people in the OR that day, and everyone was doing their job so efficiently and so beautifully. He said it was like watching a symphony, and everybody was so calm. So the doctor, the anesthesiologist, said, I'm going to need to put her under. And I could feel the anesthesia coming on. And right before my eyes closed and I drifted off, I heard the tiniest little cry. And I remember looking at Mark, and I said, this is the part where I tend to get emotional. I said, she's safe. I don't know. I got her to you. She's safe. I don't know if I'm coming back. I love you. And
wow.
The next thing I remember was that I was flying over the orchards in our town, looking down on all the orchards. And I'm flying over Ojai, and I keep hearing, Charidie, wake up, Charidie. Come on, Charidie, wake up, Charidie, wake up, Charidie. And I'm like, who is talking to me? I am flying right now. And, I'm having a great time. And it was me, they were trying to get me to come up kind of like in post-recovery.
Wow.
And, so that's the part that I remember. And Sally, I'd love to hear from your perspective. What happens south of the curtain?
You're right. Well,
wow.
Your baby on the way out, your uterus had a little tear up the side. Do you remember Dr. D discussed that? But of course, you started to bleed, and it was very hard to stop that bleeding and get it stitched up in time. And we could tell by the amount of blood that it was a hemorrhage. There's a certain amount that we can kind of guesstimate. We call it an estimated, but sometimes we have to do a quantitative. So we're actually counting the amount of cc's that you're losing with a special little machine. So we were doing that, and we knew, let's activate the massive blood loss call, which is to call the lab, the blood bank, and say, we need to activate this now, which they send us units of blood and clotting factors and plasma, and they send it like in a little cooler, and it comes right to the OR. So it's great. We have everything we need to give you right there. But
wow.
You were having like a really serious postpartum hemorrhage. While Dr. Diesfeld was, he immediately was like, he didn't wait until they gave him a number of how many cc's. He could just tell, let's do it right now. Yeah. So that was great. He's so experienced that, you were in great hands.
And I will say, I think that the most important thing to say is Lennix. Lennix Love is our daughter's name.
Yes.
She was born on May 25th and at 4:23 p.m. And she could not be healthier, more well-developed and happier. And I think, looking back, hindsight's always 20/20, but I really think that the reason why I didn't go into labor, her kicks were so strong and I was so comfortable. I think she knew that, she just needed to stay put until I came and got her.
She kicked me on the way out.
Did she?
She did. She totally did. Yes.
Maybe she has a soccer future.
Sally, is it true? She came out because she was so low when she was released. She was so low. Tilt, she spun around, right?
Yes, yeah. I believe somebody was pushing from below to push her back up, and then she spun into a breech position. Mm-hmm. And that's probably when that little extra tear came to make you bleed up in the uterus.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. But then, so he had to deliver her in a breech, and she was kicking and kicking on the way out.
That's amazing.
Because I had to take her then and bring her over, and I had to turn her over, and I was so happy to see her. But she was give me a good kick in the arm. I was like, she's fine.
She was really strong. We, once we got into recovery, the one thing all the nurses said is that we've never had to wrestle a newborn to change her diaper. And we thought that maybe she has a future on a kickboxing team.
Yeah.
She's got these legs that are so strong, and she's got this spirit about her that is, she really is our little warrior woman, we call her.
Well, her mom is really strong.
Yeah.
You used to ride horses in the rodeos, right?
I was married to somebody previously who was active in rodeo, but I grew up in Wyoming. Rode a little bit, but was an athlete all my life, and just very competitive.
Yeah,
I feel that.
Yeah.
What sports did you engage in?
So volleyball was my primary. I swam, and I played volleyball through college. Awesome. And that was my main go-to.
Yeah, that's so cool.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So the one thing that I have had to work very hard to make peace with, I didn't realize that there is something that, a traumatic birth experience. That was all new to me. I didn't ever realize that it was a thing, and also how prevalent it was. The one thing that I struggled with quite a bit is missing the moment on the chest, and then missing watching Mark see her for the first time and cut the cord. How was Mark in there?
Oh gosh, I think he was quiet, but peaceful, so strong. His energy is so strong, isn't it? Just being in the room, everyone's aware of him. He's got this force to be reckoned with all around his aura. He doesn't say a whole lot, but his energy is speaking for him. He better not mess with that man. That's how we all feel. But he was gazing at his baby, and he was over behind, and a few times I was looking over to see how baby was doing, and of course baby was wow, I'm doing okay. And he was just gazing down at his baby and just so happy. But of course then we had to put you to sleep, so he didn't get to bring baby to you. He had to go to the recovery room and be out there with the baby without you. But I have a feeling he was probably doing skin to skin out there, was he?
Can I tell you? Yes. And can I tell you, she is now 5 months old. I just attended my first conference for work. And so Mark watched her. We went as a family down to Anaheim, and Mark watched her during the day. And for the first 3 months of her life, and anytime I leave them alone for longer than 10 minutes together, that baby is going to be in just a diaper, and they're going to be doing skin to skin. And they did skin to skin from that very moment. Even now they do it if they have longer than 10 minutes together and I'm not there. For the longest time I said, we have to get her dressed because she's not, and she still does not like getting dressed because we just didn't dress her for so long. And then, I'm so glad that they had that bonding moment. And the thing that I struggled with a little bit was, I was very decided and dedicated to breastfeeding. But it took some time for my milk to come in, which is, they say, very common because of the trauma and the surgery and the transfusion. And that was the one thing that I really struggled with when I got home, is that it was in the height of the formula shortage.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
My milk hadn't come in. I need to feed my baby. And that's where I started to feel, that was the first time that I started to feel like I had failed in some way. I'm happy to report that we supplemented a little bit of formula for like the first 4 days. Since then, she's been exclusively breastfed. And so I'm so grateful.
You're amazing.
And Mark also got it in his own way. And the bond that it's created has been pretty incredible.
Right.
Wow.
Charidie, isn't it a shame that women feel guilty, even though you went through all of that, that you feel like, oh, I feel less than because I'm not getting enough milk, or, but the thing is, you were fabulous, you listened to your instinct, you helped us to listen to your instincts, and then you went through all of this, and now look at what's happening. Your baby is perfectly normal and healthy and strong. But do you still have moments where you go back to like, oh, those gaps in your memory of what must have been happening? And
so there's a few
sometimes
things
it's the not knowing that's traumatic, right?
So there was a few things that that I think would be really helpful for other women that are listening to this to know moving forward. The first thing is, I should say that I had a little bit more of exposure than I would say what is maybe traditionally common, because of Mark and his interaction with the SEAL teams and several of our friends being combat veterans. So I thought that I had a good understanding and grasp on what PTSD is. Foolishly, in my mind, I always thought, well, you just need to find peace within the situation and find that silver lining. It doesn't work like that. I immediately started having flashbacks in the hospital. Like every time I closed my eyes, I would start hearing the sounds. And that's when I knew pretty early, like I've got some post-traumatic stress happening here. And the one thing that I was very fortunate about is that Mark and I immediately started talking about it. And when I used to tell this story, I couldn't get it out without sobbing. And I talked to as many people as I could about it. And every time I would say it, it got easier and easier. The other thing that I think was very, very helpful for me, and I would encourage any woman who's in this situation or knows of anyone in this situation, is that I had all of my nurses were angels, but I had this one particular angel of a nurse, and she said, I hope you won't be upset with me, and I hope I didn't overstep. But I called somebody from, I think it was social services. Yes, social services. I wanted to make sure I used the right term. And in my mind, I'm thinking, what am I doing wrong? And I kind of got a little bit scared. And she says, no, I think it's just nice to have somebody to talk to. And this woman was a saint. I mean, Mark and I absolutely loved her. And she came in and she just listened to us. She gave us resources on, who to reach out to, and, different strategies that might help. I would highly encourage you to, as you're considering your birth plan, just being aware that some of those things exist, maybe not incorporating it as part of your plan, but just knowing that in the event things happen differently than you expect, that you have different things that can offer you, particularly at CMH in Ventura. This lady was incredible. So this is something that's a kind of a funny little story, how all these come together. So the necklace I'm wearing says Lennix. And this was my push present, which I was adamant that I needed to get, even before everything happened. The lady who was our social service worker had on this exact same necklace in the same font, but hers said Love, and that's our daughter's middle name.
Wow,
beautiful! And I thought, amazing. I kept staring at her necklace, and it was almost like God, or the universe just telling me, "You're going to be okay." Now, when I got home, I was so. I think, as all new moms are, I was so eternally grateful, and I did underestimate the hormones that happened, the hormonal shift. I'm thankful that I don't believe that I had a lot of depression, but I had a lot of fear afterwards, and I would just hold her, and it was was a really interesting feeling because you're so grateful and so many things could have happened different. And it happens, everything happened so perfectly that we got the most beautiful, amazing, incredible outcome. But I still was sad and mournful of certain experiences that I lost. And there was a time, I think Lennix was about 2 months old, and I remember getting up, and I was in her room with her, and I remember getting up. She was asleep, and I went into our room, and Mark was on his phone, just kind of scrolling as we do sometimes late at night. And I was just sobbing, and I said, I never got to see the way you looked at her the first time. I'll never get that back. And he's such a great man. And he said, you're right. He said, and that's sad and that's okay. He said, but you'll get to see every other look I give her for the rest of her life, or the rest of our life. And I was like, you know,
that's
all right.
true.
Yeah. You know, I was like, all right, I can give up one time if I get all the rest of them. And so I think being able to talk to people, also Sally, you know, we did the assessment. I think it's important for women to know that that exists. And I tend to be a perfectionist, overachiever. So when I first filled that out, I didn't want to be honest with myself, I think. And so thankfully you were so warm and the staff is so encouraging there that I filled it out again and the numbers were quite different. And so I think for women to know, give yourself permission to feel your feelings, because nothing that you feel is wrong. And it's okay. We know it's okay to ask for help, but that doesn't mean that we're a failure in any way. And the other thing is that we don't know what we don't know. And there are professionals that it's their pleasure, I've realized, to help assist us. And then we're not a burden in that way. And I think that was one of my biggest lessons that I would want all moms who have a, you know, a stressful birth experience know. And that even if your situation ends up perfectly beautiful in the end, the way that mine did, it's still okay to feel the feelings of sadness and, you know, even jealousy for some things. Like those are all normal.
And even a little grief because you didn't have the birth that you were hoping and planning for. There's a kind of a little feeling of loss, isn't there?
Yes. And I think the other thing, I mean, the big message, if there's like one thing I can say that, and this is from, you know, pregnancy, birth, and throughout motherhood, that I've learned over and over and will continue to learn with every day, is trust your gut. Trust your intuition. Listen to that inner voice, even when it doesn't make sense, even when you're in the front seat and you get shoved at the back seat and you don't know why. Go with it. And
so interesting. You're so spiritual, Charidie. I just love it. I love that your intuition is so strong, and that's going to help you throughout your whole life, and it'll help you with mothering. You know, your intuition about, is my baby safe, throughout the rest of the time you have with her. You know, you listen to that intuition. It's going to steer you in the right direction. I'm sure of it. And your husband as well, you know, his experiences with his life led him to be the right person with you in that experience too. We've seen, you know, traumatic births before, and sometimes the partner's not able to cope with it as well as, say, Mark could cope with it. Mark, you could feel his energy. He'd been through something similar before, you know, or he'd witnessed, you know, hard things, or perhaps even he's had his own experiences with post-traumatic stress. But he knew how to handle it. He knew how to stay calm and to be with you. Though his face became more serious, but he knew. And I'm sure he's traumatized a little bit from it as well.
I was just going to say, you brought up something that I think is really important that I'd love to include on this episode, is that one of the things that I find happens so often is that I come from a family of predominantly women. We don't have a lot of boys in our family, other than through marriage. And when we initially got pregnant, you know, all the attention is on the new mom, and rightfully so. Your body's going through a lot of things, but I remember my uncle, who I'm very close to, making sure to carve out time to say, Mark, how are you feeling? And my aunt would say, Mark, how are you feeling? How is this experience going for you? Because it is very much a partnership. And And I think allowing them to have their own experience, and then to take, when it comes, to fast forward that, and whether it's a beautiful, easy birth or a traumatic birth, even though physically they are not going through the same things that they are mentally and emotionally, spiritually, they absolutely are. And so being able to, recognize their trauma. I know that at least in our household, men have a different way of communicating that, and sometimes not feeling as open to communicate with that. And I think that's something that we found to be very healing within our relationship, is being able to come together and say, let me tell you what happened in the room from my eyes. Mm-hmm. Tell me what happened in the room from your eyes.
Yes.
And how are we feeling about that now? And
every detail.
It was so different. And I think it's very difficult for men who are traditionally these natural protectors to watch this thing, whatever the thing is, happen to their partner and their baby, can be very scary because they feel so helpless in that moment. And that's the thing, is that I felt so helpless, but I knew I had a great team. Yeah, I knew you had a great team. And I did. I had a really great team. So,
well, we had a great patient. But
I felt like I did need to apologize for turning so crazy so fast, but I know that you don't hold that against me.
Absolutely. No. I think you're just so intuitive, and I loved it that you could, feel that instinct so strong that you were like, no, this is what we need to do.
Right.
And, I always want to listen to women's intuition. Sometimes we might get a woman just coming in, she's still pregnant, she's not in labor, but she instinctively knows something. There's just something wrong. And then when we look in there with an ultrasound or, yes, indeed, she's right. We should listen to women.
Wow.
But Charidie, I want to tell you that your story is so strong, and it's going to help women. Whoever, listens to this, sometimes they're just interested in the stories that we're telling them. But I know that this is going to help women, perhaps women who've already been through a traumatic birth, but also women who that is their future, to know that to listen to your instincts and to trust that you're going to get through this, that, tell people what you're feeling, what you're thinking, what you need. Speak up.
Thank you. And I encourage women too, that if for some reason this happens to you, ask your medical team what happened from their eyes as well. Because I think, you had mentioned sometimes it's like the things that you missed or what happened, being able to have some of those pieces to put, even though you don't know where to kind of file them away to, it's helpful to see that, to know, and especially because, during, everything seemed very, very normal. You'd done this thousands and thousands of times, that there was no way to know without speaking up. And it's okay to ask the questions of your team and to trust them. And I think that's the other thing, is making sure that you find a team that, early on in your pregnancy, that you feel so comfortable with. And, that will connect with you in several different ways. I do have to honor somebody really fast. We had the radiologist, is that the proper term?
The ultrasound tech. Yes.
So,
Lainey.
Lainey. She was so incredible. I looked forward to seeing her every time. I got to do my 3D ultrasounds.
I'm going to tell her.
And there's this moment where I have to tell this funny story. Every time I would go in, I would be so excited to see Lennix, and she, little stinker, would just hide from me. She said, no, I don't get to see you. You have to wait to see me. And she would hide. And Lainey would, maneuver and move quickly and just do everything she could to get me a good picture. And on my birthday, Mark, unfortunately, was the only ultrasound that he missed, had to be out of town. And all of a sudden, we look on the monitor, and Lennix, we finally got her face to show, and she starts licking her umbilical cord. And we were laughing so hard. And Lainey's like, I have never seen this before. And I was like,
cute.
I was like, I'm giving birth to a little weirdo. And
that is hilarious.
Everyone, but yes, I'm so grateful for her. She was amazing and very much part of the journey as well.
Yeah. She sounds unique. Well, so your baby.
I mean. yeah.
So wow. when you have the traumatic type of birth that you had, it's really important to talk about it like you're doing, because all the little jigsaw pieces, the jigsaw puzzle pieces of your birth story eventually start filling in your mind, so that can calm you and give you your birth story. It may not be the birth story you wanted, love, but it's a great birth story, and it's a strong woman, and you were the right woman to have this baby. You know?
Well, I'm so grateful. And I think the most beautiful part is that even though that's not how I anticipated my story beginning, I get to help facilitate how it ends. And that's the most important. Is that the first part was out of my control, but I'm so thankful that I still get a story. And that's the thing I remind myself every day, is that I'm so lucky that I was always surrounded with love, that I have the tremendous amount of support that I do, and that I get to stand here and I still have the honor and the privilege of still being able to have a story, and I still get to add pages to that every day. And that's what I try to focus on. Every once in a while, there's a feeling that kind of circles back around, but I will say that the days are so much sunnier now, 5.5 months in. Tired, of course, as we all are at this stage. But I wouldn't, even if I could, I wouldn't go back and change a thing.
Wonderful. You're so strong. You're
so wise. And I think all the words you've shared, we couldn't have said it better. You know, I think just hearing it from you will help someone that listens to this, absolutely.
Well, I appreciate you guys giving me a platform to do so. And I want to say thank you both to the work that you're doing, because I mentioned this before we start recording. And I think it's important to let the audience know that the Bleed in Truth podcast helped get me through a lot of, tearful nights. And when I was having some of those big emotions, hearing other people's stories was very calming and helpful to me. And so I remember kind of texting Sally saying, when's the next episode coming? Lennix isn't sleeping through the night yet, and this is how I get through.
So sweet.
And so it was very helpful to do that. And I think the work that you are both doing is so helpful in helping so many women. And I'm grateful to be a part of it.
Thank you for helping us. Thank you for helping us with our work.
Of course. It's my pleasure.
We'll have to do a lot more episodes now, Mom.
Yes.
Let's get back on it.
Thank you, Charidie, dear girl. You're a joy to talk to. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you both.
And if you guys are still listening, please make sure to hit the like button and subscribe. If you're on Apple, if you could leave a review, that really helps. And we hope to bring some more beautiful stories like Charidie's in future episodes.